revitalization of Union Square has many, many moving parts. One of the most important to local and community activists and Somerville residents is a community benefits agreement between the city and the developer. At the July 28th Union Square Civic Advisory Committee meeting, Mayor Joseph Curtatone introduced a new approach to creating that agreement. With financial support from the Barr Foundation, the city has engaged a nationally recognized real estate think tank to facilitate the negotiations. Our Heather Avison was there and brings us a look inside this 2.5-hour meeting.
What I want to say tonight is our intent is not to negotiate these issues behind closed doors. We want it to be transparent, we want it to be engaged, we want you to be involved, and you need to do the work.
Having set the stage for a collaborative meeting, the mayor then introduced Chris Leinberger, president of LOCUS, a real estate think tank that advocates for mixed-income, walkable urban communities. Leinberger acknowledged Somerville's commitment to social equity and a public benefits plan before outlining his vision of successful community development.
Our definition of social equity is a combination of housing affordability and transportation accessibility. Most of us in the urbanism world understand that you have to look at both. And you look at household spending on both housing and transportation, and shifting it to spending that money on housing, on education, on savings, and keeping it local. That's going to be the big macro shift over the next generation, and it's already happening because of this trend towards walkable urban development. So what we want to lay out for you, if you want it, is a strategic planning process for Union Square for both economic growth and social equity. This has got to be a mixed income place if it's really successful. And one is to recognize how great places evolve. There's a very important role for the public sector. Public sector sets the table. Zoning, infrastructure provision, all sorts of stuff that the public sector has to do before anybody shows up. Another important role is the private sector. Private sector builds 80% of the built environment. Private sector doesn't show up, things don't get built. Look what's happened for the last 50 years. In Somerville, it's kind of been bumping along. But now it's your time.
Leinberger laid out his plans for a 2-day education and strategy session with decision makers to create a framework for moving forward.
And it starts with making sure that we all understand, and particularly I need to understand this, the various issues that you've been talking about working on for the last number of years, really. I mean, the CAC's been around for a couple of years, but before that, you know, Summer Vision and all, I mean, you've done some remarkable work. You've done a lot of the heavy lifting. What I'm hoping this process will do will bring it to closure. But taking all that information about the vision, about the infrastructure, about programs that are needed, that needs to make sure that everybody on the CAC and anybody else involved with this process will be up to speed. This works under the assumption, this is my Quaker background, works under the assumption that you bring people together, people of goodwill come together, you educate everybody about the same stuff, they all know the same thing, and then you give them what I refer to as the universe of options. That's going to be on day 2, of what the skeleton is of a strategy.
The question of just who the decision makers are and who will be invited to the table took center stage once the presentation turned to Q&A.
My question is, you're talking about a 2-day, the strategy and action plan, like 2-day kind of meeting, and I'm not clear from what you're describing here who gets to be at that meeting. Is that an open meeting for all, residents of Somerville, or who's in that conversation?
I'm also wondering why this process exists, if there's a community that has done a lot of this work and can speak to a lot of the issues that you're talking about.
You mentioned that the decision makers are going to be in the room. Is that going to include the Somerville Redevelopment Authority?
You tell me.
If it makes sense, we'll be there.
Because they're the ones that are going to be making the decisions, right?
Well, let me just say this. If I need to be there, I'm going to be there. If representatives of the SRA have to be there, they'll be there. But what I want is open, candid dialogue. I think we all need that in this process.
The thing about these places is, again, more is better, and we're all in this together. This isn't, if you turn it into a combative process, you all lose. You're shooting yourself in the foot. And the vitality that's going to make this a very special place will go someplace else.
Well, for the past year, the CAC as an entity, we've been talking about community benefits and social equity. And for the past year or more, Union United has been talking about it. And I think that there's a very big level of tension in the room there because they thought that this was going to be the first meeting where we were really going to be talking about it. But at the same time, we don't have a process. We don't know how to get there. So the fundamental question about whether we spend 2 days with you and everybody in the room, not just the CAC, whether you spend 2 days with us and more, if you can help us find that path to actually close that gap and start implementing some of the types of things that Union United as a group has been looking at more than the CAC has up until this point, I think it would be a tremendous value to this entire process.
So we want decision makers in the room that are able to make decisions about, to make commitments about what they're going to do, and they can credibly volunteer to do things to help make it happen. If you have a lot of people that are just bitching and moaning, it's important to listen, important to hear people's concerns. What we need in the room are people that are going to make things happen.
Meeting dates are being finalized. According to the scope of work submitted by LOCUS, a strategic planning task force made up of the CAC and additional representatives that could include the master developer, subject experts and city staff will be formed before the meetings.